I'm going to call tonight's meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Wall.
Here.
Mayor Matsumoto Wright.
Here.
Almost said Congresswoman. Councilwoman Murray.
Present.
Councilmember Ryan.
Here.
Councilmember Payne Donovan.
Present.
Councilmember Sonmore. Here. Councilmember Woodard.
Accounted for.
That concludes roll call.
Thank you very much. All right, so first on our agenda is the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. A few things to let you know about this evening. First, I wanted to mention the open house on August 12th. We didn't have a meeting last week, so I did want to mention that this evening. Had a really great turnout on the environmental impact statement and comments, and I would just wanted to remind everybody that comments on that document close at the end of this month. So if you have anything that you'd like to share with us, please do so as soon as possible. I also wanted to remind everybody that our permit portal will be closing for about 4 days starting next week, and that's so that we can migrate the data to our new permitting portal, which we think will provide a much better user experience and help us track everything that's going on in the city as far as permits and development opportunities go. Next, City Happenings, our quarterly newsletter, goes out next week, mails out next week, and I wanted to remind everybody about the Terrace Talk event on September 11th, and we're going to be talking about the 2025-2026 budget. So hopefully we'll have good attendance for that and some good questions. On Monday, we will be closing the intersection of 48th and 216th. That's the Safe Routes to School project, and we're doing that so that we can ensure that we get that project done before school starts, so we don't have any problems as far as the school year starting goes. And lastly, I have some posters in the back for the event on Friday the 30th for opening of our light rail station. So that's going to be from 4 to 8. We're going to have a great, it'll be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of activities out there in partnership with the chamber, who's taken a lead on that, and us in a supporting role, but we're really looking forward to that event a week from tomorrow. And that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Sonmore.
Thanks. Can you just clarify on the project, I drove by it last night, on 216th and 48th, will that have stop signs? And I thought the answer was, not four-way, it's just going to be the two.
I believe it's only the two, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I can get back to you with that info.
Okay. So I'm hoping, looking at that and comparing 228th and 48th, there's the condensity of population is more at 216th and 48th. So I'm hoping that we can do a study, and I know we talked about it a lot when we were talking about when it was going to kick off, but if we could get a four-way stop there for some calming issues,
Sure.
Especially with light rail going in.
Yeah, I can, I'll talk with our engineering department about that, sure.
Anyone else? Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager, for the updates. I know it's been a busy summer and there's lots going on. I saw an accomplishment on LinkedIn today for you that you didn't share with us that I would love to hear more about, and I'm sure our community would appreciate hearing a little bit about the hard work that you're putting in to better support us, or best support us, maybe is the way to say that.
Thank you. I was recently awarded the Credentialed Manager designation from the International City Managers Association. Very proud of that, and thank you for recognizing it. I'm not usually one to share those types of things, but I appreciate that.
We appreciate it too. I was going to say no, yes. I was just saying thank you. Yes, I think that definitely deserves a round of applause. So that is not a small undertaking, and there's a lot of value having looked a lot into that credentialing as a council member to better understand that. Appreciate all of the work that goes into that and how much we value how much value we derive as a city from all of that work. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. So now we can go on to the presentation on the recreational pavilion options with our Recreation and Parks Director, Jeff Betts.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. I'm Jeff Betts, the Recreation Parks Director for the city. And tonight, we are here to give a presentation on options for the Recreation Pavilion. So the purpose of tonight, and just to reiterate, the Recreation Pavilion is a regional community asset that is 56 years old. And so tonight, we're just going to give some background information and then also potential options for the Recreation Pavilion. So, and just to dive a little deeper into the agenda itself, as I mentioned, we'll give some background and then have some choices that we can talk about, either remodel or rebuild or status quo. And there are also some funding options, the request of council, as well as questions and discussion. So to touch on some history of the Recreation Pavilion, you can see that image is conceptual from the original floor plan and modeling of that Recreation Pavilion. So the property was purchased with $92,585 with local, state, and federal funds. And that is a combination of what's now Terrace Creek Park and also where the pavilion sits. So there was a voter-approved bond and a real kind of groundswell of support that initiated the pavilion process amongst concerned residents as a new community back then. So the voter-approved bond was approved in 1964 for construction, and that building cost $512,000 in 1964. It was constructed in 1968, and before the pandemic, we were averaging about 400,000 users a year. So there have been various remodels. I'll go over a few of those. And then additionally, the last time it was actually studied in a little bit of detail was in 2009. The Civic Facilities Advisory Task Force recommended the replacement of that building. So a few of the investments, this isn't all of them, but just some of the major ones. As mentioned, in 1968, it was constructed with unlimited general obligation bonds, and it came in $72,000 under the engineer's cost estimate at the time. Racquetball courts were constructed when the big craze for racquetball started in the 70s, so that was 1977. Courts 1 through 3 were added for $355,000, and that was councilmanic bonds. And then in 1981, there were additional courts constructed, and that was courts 4 through 6. And then there was also a new cover over the south patio, and new offices were added in addition as well. In 1995, well, there's a planning process that happened in 1983, but the actual construction of the project was 1995, where the locker rooms were moved and offices were enclosed at the front. There was a little area with lighting put over kind of how you see it now at the front desk registration area. And that locker room remodel also included moving the hot tub to that back area where the staff locker rooms are now. So that project was also developed with a steering committee of people that were interested in that development, and they got input into how that remodel would happen. And there was a full community input process, and again, that was achieved with councilmanic bonds. So 2002 was one of the larger remodels we undertook, and that was almost $2.5 million, and that was taking that forward thrust kind of square pool with a diving well and diving board and converting it to more of a leisure pool aspect. So it added a leisure pool as well as a river, a lazy river, and it's the format that you see now as well as the last time that was remodeled. Additionally, the roof work was done in 2002. We converted the racquetball courts, one set of racquetball courts, into a dance studio and an indoor playground and a flexible space. And then there was HVAC work done at the same time. So current programs of the Recreation Pavilion, and to point out how many people are here tonight, it is a very popular location. A lot of people enjoy the Recreation Pavilion, not only from Mountlake Terrace, but places outside of Mountlake Terrace, and that's why we call it a regional facility. So currently, this last year, we were at about 270,000 visits, still recovering from the pandemic, and really the recovery is not in the demand. There's plenty of demand for the facility. The recovery is in our staffing levels. And the facility is about 33,000 square feet. It has obviously the pool, but it has programs for dance, fitness, childcare, racquetball, as well as the indoor playground. So a few things to hit on, just to talk about briefly is, first of all, the community need and the value of the Recreation Pavilion. It's been spoken about, written about in many different planning processes that I'll talk about in a second, but it is an icon to our community and it is well loved, and there aren't many facilities like it, especially a town of our size. Many people that travel to visit me or that are in the area talk about how they wish they had something like this in their community because it is rare. So it's also considered an economic driver for our community. It does bring people from everywhere to visit and spend money in Mountlake Terrace and to eat in Mountlake Terrace and shop. So one of the council goals, as you recognize also, is that was to identify a pathway to redevelop that recreation pavilion to continue providing recreation opportunities for all ages and abilities. And just to hit on some of the values of recreation, it does provide equitable access and really affordable programs to many people that would not have that access. If you go to rival programs or competing programs nearby, it is much, much more expensive for childcare, for pool access, and almost everything we do is affordable, or at least has an affordable route for people. So on a national level, recent NRPA survey just found that 91% of U.S. adults agree that parks and recreation provide good opportunities, but it's not only for recreation, but to interact, and that social events allows them to mix and mingle with others. So the other part of that is, we talked about the social events that happen and physical opportunities that are obvious, but it does reduce healthcare costs in our community. It does reduce obesity and promote mental health. So, and some of the little things that we don't think about is the job training. All the people's first jobs who happen at the Recreation Pavilion, how important that is to our city and our community as well. So to continue on community priorities, and there are several, this is not all of the planning processes that have happened, have referenced the Recreation Pavilion. Obviously, the Recreation Parks and Open Space Plan is the most frequent mention. If you hit Control F and look up Recreation Pavilion, it comes up 48 times. I know it because I did it. So it is frequently mentioned, and it's not just the recent Recreation Park Open Space Master Plan, but it's each successive every 6 years has been identified as an important community asset that needs to be planned for. So, and those plans have outlined the need to replace the building, and really it's due to its age and inflexibility. The 2022 plan, one of the major findings and a top priority for major improvement was to replace the Recreation Pavilion. Specifically, it noted that the facility is no longer able to adequately support present, let alone future indoor recreation program needs and expectations. One of the comments I wanted to share just from that survey process that we did was somebody sent in a message to us that the pool is old and too small. Not enough lap swim time, often share lanes with multiple people floating. We need a bigger new pool. So many of the comments were along those lines for the Recreation Pavilion. Some of the survey data also pointed to the replacement of the pavilion itself being the top ranked park amenity to consider adding, and that tied also with acquiring new parkland. So the Civic Facilities Advisory Task Force was appointed in June 2008 by the City Council, and they were established to make a recommendation on replacing the community's aging civic facilities, including the pavilion, the Ballinger Lake Golf Course Clubhouse at the time, and also Fire Station 18. And because of the age and lack of flexibility of that current recreation pavilion, the task force recommended that an entirely new structure be constructed next to the existing pavilion. The task force noted that the current site is a favorable location, and constructing a new facility would likely avoid disrupting operations that could result in losing existing customers. The new pavilion design was recommended to council following the completion of a long-range business plan to identify features to provide to the community, such as lap pool, walking track, or basketball courts, things of that nature. Additionally, the town center plan, respondents in that planning process did highlight the pavilion is an essential need and it actually draws residents into town. And also a future concern was addressing the walkability and making sure people can walk to organize events and those community interactions and available amenities to people and how it augments the town center. The comp plan in its different iterations as well. I'll reference the 2015 one, not the one that's in draft form, but in 2015, it reflected that on all those recommendations and outlined the need to conduct a space and program needs assessment. So the National Community Survey has been a frequent topic of recreation parks, as you know, and the most recent one, 81% of respondents recognized it as the system as excellent or good, and 82% as essential. That 2021 survey, there was a very specific question about replacing the recreation pavilion, and 82% rated it as either somewhat important, very important, or essential to replacing. So task force recommendations, I mentioned a few of them, but the Civic Facilities Advisory Task Force did recommend that a new structure be built on the current property. The current structure would be impossible in the recommendation to remodel, and that's basically just due to the age. It is a concrete structure, all the walls are concrete, and to remodel that is not going to be flexible for now or in the future needs, and to be able to make changes to the facility would be essential, and the current shell that sits there would not be conducive to that. So also, obvious bonus is that the pavilion property is owned by the city already, would not have to purchase additional property. It has sufficient parking, it would be a town center draw, and can maintain customer base if built adjacent. These are straight from the task force, not my recommendations, but the task force recommendations. So, and the image in here also is a conceptual that was drawn by Miller Hull in 2009 to show the recreation pavilion, basically where the Sonics court is now. So that Miller Hull space analysis they did in 2009 took those 33,000 square feet of existing space and recommended 74,000 square feet of space. Now, this was done before Linwood remodeled as well. And so there's been additional changes in the region and environment, so these recommendations don't all hold up now, but it is important to note that they were done. It was recommended, a business plan was needed. The cost estimate in 2009 was $38 million and was recommended to follow a traditional property tax levy rather than a park district to maintain oversight and ownership. So the remodel or rebuild community options, there's obviously the status quo, which is what we have right now. Right now, we're tracking 40% cost increases over the past 4 years for facilities maintenance of that building. And there's a lot of factors involved with that. There's staffing costs, there's efficiencies related to all the functions and features that we have with pumps and everything else that is just not as efficient as some of the newer things are now. We have done retrofits with some lighting, so we have been able to achieve some efficiency that way. But there is, I should say, old equipment there as well still. And you can see one of the photos here. Luckily, we've updated since that photo. That's from the set, I believe that's from the 70s there. But the other option, one of the other options is renovation. And going off of the previous recommendations from the task force that it wasn't viable due to the age of the building and inflexibility really of just trying to change it for needs today. And additionally, basically you'd be tearing it down to the studs, but there are no studs. It's concrete walls. But replacement is the other option. And so different things would have to be decided for that. There would have to be location decisions, space needs. Would the city achieve this alone or with partners? What are those different financing options? So the follow-up, next slide on that status quo, this is the accumulated net present value that McKinstry put together for us. And these are just the critical elements that need replacement within the recreation pavilion. And this really just illustrates, if you do not replace things, how things escalate. And due to inflation and other items such as that, everything gets more expensive when you put things off. So just showing that the longer you wait, the worse things get. Our critical elements include the pool heat recovery unit, all the air handling units, the building automation systems, the roof, of course, lots of plumbing and electrical that needs to be replaced. So just some more photos showing the aging infrastructure. On the bottom left photo is our HRU. It's like the heat return is where the air from the pool exits out the building. And on the top, you can see George is actually holding pieces of it that we've been trying to fix as we go with putting in new pieces of sheet metal. And then the bottom, you can see some of the things that we don't use there anymore, but that are still inside the recreation pavilion that look like they came from Apollo missions. So from the renovation angle of this, really we would want to undertake a needs assessment no matter what we do, renovation or rebuild. We need to know what is needed in the community and what's going to support a recreation center, and that actually lends to the size of the building as well. So is this going to be a Mountlake Terrace facility size-wise, or is it going to be a regional? It costs more for regional, but it also has a larger user base that recovers more costs. I mean, an aquatic center is regional by nature. People travel. They do already to our facility. So the current facility does not meet that need for the current needs assessment. And as mentioned, it's not flexible. We would need to do a part of that, a funding analysis. How is it going to be funded? And then that design build process. And then one example is Linwood. Linwood did this in 2011 for $25 million approximately. Theirs was not concrete. So they were able to tear it down to the studs, literally, and they added 16,000 square feet to their facility, but $25 million for the remodel. So for replacing the facility, there are options. We want to take a look, one of the recommendations would be to take a look at all of these and determine what is a good pathway, but the partnering option could be many different ways that you partner, and I'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, revising that needs assessment, that's 15 years old, evaluate that location, the property needs, the analysis, and anything you do for replacement, from day one that we make a decision, it's probably, I'm guessing, that we're talking 5 years. Just going through that public input process and finding funding partners or funding itself, and design takes a long time, construction itself even longer. So where? That's the question too, is where. I highlighted in this.
Sorry to jump in. Is that 5 years, sort of assuming we have a funding source as well?
Yes. Okay. I mean, we would need some time, depending on what route is picked, right? If there was a councilmonic bond, that would be quicker, but it's not going to fund a new facility by itself. So the location is obviously essential, and that could be determined by partners as well. So if there is, and we'll talk about these other options, but if there is a developer that's a partner, so to speak, then that could be in town center, or it could be somewhere else in Mountlake Terrace, even potentially if it's a regional facility outside of Mountlake Terrace. Those are all options that the council would consider eventually if that was the road they wanted to take. So, but the different pieces to that would be ownership, parking, where's the space available? We need a town center draw. It's essential that we activate the town center. It could still operate if it was on its current location during construction, which we wouldn't lose your customer base, which is key to retaining that cost recovery. New property, obviously, you're going to have to acquire that land, and a partnership could minimize the cost, and it may take time to develop that way because you're on that partner's timeline, right? So one of the things that we'd want to happen either way is to take a look at hiring a consultant for a needs assessment. And that would lead to potentially also a business plan. Like, we need to know how this facility would perform and what kind of cost recovery it would have, what kind of ongoing maintenance costs it would be, and kind of get the full picture of that. Currently, it is a regional facility, so there would be decisions made on is that the direction that council would want to go as a regional facility. Would we look at other facilities and partners? One example is that a couple of different needs assessments were achieved just in the last year and a half or so. And so one would be the North King County Aquatics Needs Assessment, and others a North Shore Aquatics Needs Assessment. And I could provide that report as well. I believe they're publicly available. I don't have the full report in front of me, but I do know that they looked at different combinations of options in North King County between Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Bothell, Kirkland, and different combinations to locate an aquatics facility, because their residents are really eager to add one because they don't have a municipal facility. So the consultants estimated that in Shoreline, if they did build on a site that they own, in a storage site, a 35,000 square foot option would cost almost $55 million. And that's with soft costs, 30% soft costs included. A larger facility, a 48,000 square foot, would be more like almost $70 million. And that's, they already own the property as well. So there are other assessments and cost estimates within that report, but just wanted to highlight a couple. So to review some of the funding options, many of you are familiar with probably all of these options, but just want to lay out a few of them. And obviously we have property tax, sales tax, parks district potentially, bond, partnerships, donations, grants, and then some other special kind of district. So property tax levy or increases of more than 1% annually have to be approved by voters. It's a 50+1 vote. And there are some examples on the right of some different examples of that for a pool itself in Cheney in 2015 and the Palouse annually. So levies can be either permanent or a fixed period of time. They can fund capital operations or maintenance costs. And they can also be used to purchase bonds or pay for loans. We did a levy lift here in 2017, I'm thinking. And so similar to that, it could be achieved. There's a sales tax option. The city's sales tax rate is currently 4 cents. The state is 65 cents, I believe, when I looked up. So the total is 10.5. So there are also unrestricted or restricted. They require voter approval, though. There is an additional option if you have a public facilities district to add a restricted sales tax. And one of the examples listed here is Aston or City of Pasco. Both have public facilities districts for pools. Other special districts, including a metropolitan park district. And that's a junior taxing district, and it is approved by a 50+1 vote as well. You can levy up to 75 cents per thousand, and boundaries can exceed more than one jurisdiction for that. So you can have multiple cities. It also can be capital and operations. And in that situation, if it was multiple cities, typically there's council members that are on that Metropolitan Park District Board from each city. And we can go in much more detail another time on that, on any of these options the council want to see, but just to briefly highlight them now. The Public Facilities District option is a municipal corporation with independent taxing authority. And the PDF boundaries, though, can only be in the jurisdiction that creates them, so there's not overlap that way. There are examples of both of these to the right here. The largest Metropolitan Park District is Metro Parks Tacoma. It's also the oldest one. And then there are many others listed here that have been very successful. So bonds, they're property tax based. There are limited tax general obligation bonds, and those are approved by council using existing revenues. And there are also unlimited tax general obligation bonds, or those are only by approval of voters. So there are many different restrictions for both of those, but an example of the limited tax ones would be some of the different remodels the pavilion actually did, been voted on in the past by council. The pool remodel in 2002 was approved by council using those existing revenues, and they were actually repaid with recreation revenues at the time over the course of years. The unlimited, approved by voters, an example would be the original pavilion was constructed by that one method. So, and then this one I'm not as familiar with, but I do know it exists. There's a 6320 tax exempt bond. It's known probably more often as a kind of the rent-to-own model. And you partner with a nonprofit to build and finance a public project up to 100% of the cost, and it's a 30-year term typically. There are a couple examples on the right listed too, is the Jewel Building, King County, and then also Redmond City Hall. So partnerships, there are a couple of different ways to go with that. There are operators. I'm guessing, to me, this would be more of a, one example would be more like Sammamish, right, where you have the city built that aquatics facility and the YMCA came in and operated it, just to save those operating costs and to partner with somebody in the community. Another one would be a shared use facility. In this picture listed here, the 12th Avenue Arts is an example of that. And there's just many different organizations in there to make that building work. So for example, I think they provided affordable housing, performing arts, nonprofit offices, and local retail and parking. So grants are much more difficult to come by for something of this size. There really are not a lot of options. You can probably bite off pieces of something of this nature, and most time that's going to be the final pieces of things. You can get state or federal appropriations, but yeah, last dollars in on that. You know, potentially like there's some FEMA funds or energy conservation grants. The other idea, it'd be potentially like a county-wide parks levy. All different options that could help potentially pay for a portion. Donations are another way. You'd have to have interested residents or people spearhead a campaign and seek private donations from corporations, foundations, or individuals. And it's been done before. So the next steps for this is staff are seeking guidance from council to get either additional information you would like to see or more detail on any one of these. I realize I did not go into great depth on any of these, or else we'd be here for quite a bit longer to go into detail, but more than willing to come back with regular presentations to cover more detail or more in depth in the future as we move forward if council would like to see that. Are there questions or discussion?
Any questions, comments?
I've got comments.
Really? Did someone raise their hand?
For comments?
Questions or comments, yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of opinions, but so I was just in the pool using the lazy river 2 months ago, or about 4 weeks ago with my grandson, and it's something I loved. I grew up taking ballet there with Mrs. Wallace and Mrs. Bam Bams, if anybody remembers them. My grandson went to childcare there. I learned how to swim there. So, of course, the pavilion has a fond place in my heart, and it represents Mountlake Terrace extremely well. This is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where the hard decisions have to be made. I've been on the council since 2000, and I remember telling Don that we had to do something about that pavilion because it looked like a big wart. And I offended him, and I did not mean to say it like that, because I said it like that because they were telling me how it was falling apart then. And so that's how we kind of got this little banter back and forth about how we're going to fix this. And so this is 24 years ago that we started in looking at how to fix this pavilion. And it's not a funny thing, and I apologize if I laugh because it's a little too close to home, but it's something where I think we need to start off, especially when we have so many people in the audience, is where in the budget would it possibly even come from, and then how much in that budget is already spoken for. So looking at the what we have money for. And then I've read a lot of your comments online too is, dig it out and redo it. Well, like you said, that's all concrete. And once we start digging, it's going to cave in. And so this is a very tough decision. And I'd like to tell you exactly what I'd like to do, but I also want to hear your comments and opinions too. But one of the things I'll just say right off the top of my head, I'd like to look at the Metropolitan District, but I do not want to partner with another city. I don't want to lose control over the pool that we have here. I do not want to lose the pool. You did mention we could build somewhere else, but then how much money would we have to put into the pavilion while we're waiting for it to get rebuilt? And do we have that money? Could we build on the other side of the property in the parking lot? And I think your wife was on that committee too, because I know when we looked at rebuilding it, we kind of looked at everything that we could possibly want. We had a track going around the top, we had basketball, and maybe we need to determine what are the bare bones that we need out of that facility to understand what our costs are. And so that's one place. So Metropolitan District property tax is something I know everybody cringes about, but we have to talk about that because that's how this facility had to get built. We went out to the voters the first time and it didn't go through, and our city hall that sat right over there was made out of cement as well. And we had water dripping into electrical, we had mold growing on the walls. It used to be a library, the fire department, and thank God our citizens approved this building. And so now I think what we're going to have to do is look to our citizens as well. I know you said to partner, that's another option. And one of the big partnering things is too is putting apartments or housing above a pool. So that would be something that we could look at too. So property taxes, Metropolitan Park. I love to hear about donations, but I've never seen it hardly ever at all. Grants, I don't really see very often either. But this is where it's how much can our citizens afford to pay for a pool? And so with all that being said and sometimes I like doing this and sometimes I don't, but putting a committee together, especially since we have so many citizens in this room here, and maybe some of them would want to volunteer, is answering some of those questions that you've laid out. I've told you my opinions. And a lot of times when you're looking at a root cause, you don't jump to what you want to do. You listen to what people want to say. But I've heard it go round and round a couple times in my last 24 years on council, and it's where the rubber meets the road. We have to do something. We have to make a plan. We can't let it go any longer because it's going to cave in on itself. And I know people think that we can rebuild it, and I've watched it be rebuilt. When I was in the lazy river, I felt the bubbles when I was going over as one of you had a jet coming in that almost knocks you over when you start going around the lazy river. And I don't want to lose it. I value everybody that works there, all the hard work that's gone there. I love seeing the senior citizens hang out in the lobby, have breakfast and coffee. And so with that all being said, I'd like to ask the council if they would be interested in forming a committee to look at what we can do with the pool, and not one that takes a year, something that would take however long whoever runs it in our city would recommend, and putting together a plan and then coming back and looking at those ideas and figuring out how to get funding for this pool. I'm long-winded and I apologize. I have so many thoughts swirling through my head because I appreciate all the comments that you guys gave about the pool and how passionate you are for a city facility that you own and that is in your own city, and I don't want you guys to lose that. And so I think the council's really good at listening to opinions and comments, and so I'll stop now so we can open the floor for some more comments and opinions.
Okay, who wants to go next? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I couldn't say it any better, and I do think
Sorry.
Jeff, your presentation really does highlight how much of a commons the pavilion is for our community, and it's it's kind of scary to think about replacing it because, you know, as we look at cost, you do sort of lose that egalitarian sort of symbol that this place is for our town, and I, you know, that change is kind of scary to think about. But also, I think you laid out the sort of the factors of sort of ongoing costs and drag on our city team and our budgets. And I'd just like to encourage us to move forward in whatever sort of way is, you know, balancing all the other facility and high priority needs that we've got in town to make sure that we're not caught flat-footed if something does fail, or if, you know, heaven forbid, something goes awry that we don't have the cash to fix. And so I'm really interested, as Councilmember Sonmore said, in those sort of funding mix ideas, and to see, you know, I know that we don't, you know, our small town, you know, gets by because we've got some gumption and we make do, and so I think it's going to take a real concerted effort, and it's really key that this community institution has some strong buy-in, and it includes, you know, a board or a sort of planning body, much like the one that got this building passed up through those ballot hurdles and built. And I'm pleased to have been on that committee, and it wasn't easy, but I do think it does yield results. And when you do have a balanced approach that looks at both cost, need, and sort of balancing those wants with the must-haves is a path forward that I think has yielded results here before. So I'll stop there, but thanks for your sort of sober work on this, and you know, I'm looking forward to finding a path forward here.
Councilmember Sonmore.
And thank you for your comments, and congratulations too. Sorry, I just noticed a new wedding ring, so I had a engagement ring. Sorry. I feel like I jumped the gun too a little bit, because I wanted to provide some more background and just bring it home. When we were looking at this years ago, to get replacement parts for the pool, you had to go on eBay, right? Because it was so old. And I know a lot of people brought up the comment, why can't you just replace it, dig it out, or replace it? But and I don't want to be the one talking about it, because you're the expert on. Do you want to just give us a little bit more background? How come we can't repatch it more and more, just so we can lay that foundation, so everybody understands where we're coming from and why we're kind of jumping to this committee already? And maybe on that committee, they could look at maybe keeping the shell for the daycare and the seniors there, or different things. But right now, the pool is like at its wit's end, right? Because you can't repair it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that the critical systems that I showed you, some of those are overwhelmingly expensive, right? So there's some things that just can't be repaired because they're at the end of their life. And one of those was that HRU that's rusted out completely, and we're trying to patch it as we go, and trying to weld on pieces that there's nothing to weld to, right? So that those are some of the issues. Then the other ones are the eBay parts. Those are gone now. So we can't even get them on eBay anymore. And so we're trying to, most time, just trying to figure out an alternate solution to something. And so it just, something becomes Frankenstein, so to speak, to make it work. But the other thing is just we could go into a lot more detail on the ongoing maintenance costs, but for instance, the pool liner that we've had to repair numerous times, and there's another repair that looks like, as you mentioned, in the river area, that the liner's folding in the spot. That one repair like that is $200,000. And a new liner is, for the whole pool, is I wouldn't even want to know what that is, but there's a lot of costs that are just going to continue to build, and we want to take care of things and keep it in operational condition. And one of the things we just did this year is replace the wood in the sauna, And that was the first time it'd been replaced since the original remodel, and that's like $30,000 just to put the new wood in. But I think that's the main concern is you can't repair things anymore. People don't know how to work on those things anymore because it's so old. When we had a fire inspection service come in, they said that we had a dinosaur for our building operation systems. And so it's hard for them to work on it, and they're trained professionals. So it's trying to get parts and pieces to work together efficiently, and it doesn't work very well to do that.
And thank you for bringing it up. I know we just lost one of our custodians, and I heard him talking before he retired. He said there's like doors around the pools and underneath that are like rusted shuts, and there's valves that people don't even know where to turn off anymore. And the way we used to build things many, many years ago, it served its purpose very, very well. And if you look at our homes, they were built very, very well. I just had an inspector come to my house and he said, I don't like Terrace homes. These homes are solid. And I believe our pool was solid too at the time because, you know, it used to be big scoop in there, and we used to have A&W root beer, I think, in there, and and then there was a pizza. So it's been remodeled and fixed, and the foundation is good, but now, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, it's just time for it to have something done, it sounds like. And that's where we want to give the community maybe a little bit more say on that and just not listen to me, and have them, you know, determine that on that committee and talk about, you know, what were you just bringing up about that as well, because I'm just putting out the realities out there so we don't get too many hopes up on it just can be repaired and ready to go. It's going to take some money and some hard sweat and tears on this. And so, Rick, what do you think?
Did someone? Steve, did you have something to say first? Oh, and then Councilmember Ryan.
I didn't want to disrupt the flow. I can wait. That said, first and foremost, thank you for your report. I always want to tease you about how many slides there are, but the reality is I always want more slides. And then we end on this one, the most boring slide of ever. So can you bump back to slide 15? Let's keep the excitement in the room. And then I'm going to have a couple of questions. Oh, it's the one where you have what it could look like. And there's like 3 slides, literally slides outside of the thing. One more. Yep, one more. There it is. Yeah. Just so people remember what we're looking at. That's artist rendition, of course, but
That's Linwood there.
dream bigger, if you will.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, going back to ours, you said in 2023 we had 270,000 visits, and I always remember these are post-pandemic numbers, so quote-unquote recovering. You mind reminding us what it was like, just say 2019. I don't know if you remember the number offhand, but just to put that in context.
In 2019, how many visits? I do not have that number.
Sure.
But more than last year's 200.
Way more than 270, maybe?
Considerably more, yes.
Considerably, yes. So we'll go with considerably more, which could put us at the 500,000. Is that too much to believe?
No, I think that's too much. It's probably in the 375 range, I would
375.
estimate.
So 375, okay. So that's 100,000 more potential visits. That's before you potentially remodel, which if we get back to those numbers, we would imagine we will get to 500,000. Right? So what I wanted to add is, one, I agree with everything I've heard, including I don't think we're moving too fast. It sounds like 25 years ago, we're moving too slow to have that committee. So in that regard, I love that idea. Let's move on something. But from a funding perspective, and going back to the idea that you're potentially looking at 400,000 visits, and remind ourselves that we're also in an interesting location where our education systems are really strong here. And I'm looking at our community college system. I'm looking at the 4-year institutions. I'm looking at the ones on the other side of the state who want a satellite over here. And I think we've learned it isn't just go outside. There's a science to this. They've always known that, but I think people are paying attention more to that. So perhaps there might be something here where you pitch, they won't save the world, but could be potentially one of those spaces in there. And you moved it to a black and white. I want to go back to I guess because that's not ours, it's Linwood. I don't mind looking at Linwood. They're our cousins. We can learn from them. But nonetheless, the point of that being there being an opportunity for them to have a footprint in there, therefore looking at it as a potential funding mutual beneficial, everybody wins, we're educating people, and our lifeguard problem is solved because it's a class now. I mean, there's all kind of ways we could look at that. So just kind of reminding us that I appreciate the funders who were there, but there might be some that were missing that would think of this very unique opportunity, this very beautiful community, and see it as a win-win. And this, the aquatic being just the entry point, there's so much more. As a 20-year resident myself, have watched my kids grow up through that, and I now use it as an incentive to get my nieces to come visit. We have a pavilion we can walk to. So just putting that out there, that even expands the education piece and who might be vested in seeing this jewel get polished.
Okay, Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you. It's nice to have such a good fan club. I like everything everyone has talked about. There was a task force, 2009, but it was not just for the pavilion. It was for everything else, like City Hall and police station and the library and things like that. I like the idea that it stays here. I like the location it's at now. I like that we own it. I like the idea that we could build a new one that is next to the old one, and the old one could keep business while the new one's being built. I like it'd be nice if we had maybe, 3 different designs, do a real super duper one, like I think in 2009 they recommended if it's not above the pool, it was above a basketball court, and then they had an upstairs track that ran around it, things like that. Because I'd like, if we could, go beyond just a pool to include more facilities for everyone, including youth, so you have a place for youth to go to help cut down graffiti and things. I don't know where youth go anymore in the evening because they're just, I used to go down the bowling alley and we had, I grew up by Green Lake, so I could go there. I could go to the recreational pavilion all day, free, basketball, shuffle board, all sorts of things, swim in the lake, swim in the pool. So we need to have something like that here. So I'd like maybe if we do have the task force, then, different models from high cost to medium to low. So I'm thinking the easiest, but not necessarily easiest, is just to get a bond and get it built. Because it's going to be hard to coordinate partnerships and things like that. We could do all that, but if we can't do that, then the idea would be to have a bond. Also, I do remember in 2009, going way back, 2009, there is a slideshow somewhere that shows the pavilion and all the archaic electrical systems going on. So it's like if a light switch went out on, say, the north end, you have to go all the way to the south end to turn it off. And things archaic like that, besides just rusting and breaking and things. So, so I know that's available. But anyway, other than that, those are my thoughts for the pavilion. Thank you.
Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the presentation. Glad we're having this conversation. I would echo everything that's already been said. I think there's lots of good positive momentum. I think that's positive momentum we need to make sure that we continue to carry forward. I would echo Councilmember Woodard that, I think we've been having this conversation for a long time, and I think a new needs assessment is important, and I think it should absolutely be one that involves our residents and gives them the opportunity to share what is important to them now and marries that with what we are envisioning for our community as we finish up our comprehensive plan for the next 20 years. And I think probably the harder piece is always the money, right? And that's usually, there's not a lack of desire for us to do all sorts of amazing things in our community. It is usually a challenge to figure out how we're going to make those things happen. And so I would love to revisit that conversation in tandem with any needs assessment and community engagement group that's being put together, because I think that is the more challenging piece. For me, I like to dream big. I don't think that's probably a surprise to any of my colleagues here. I like to start with all of the things that we want and envision and dream for our community, and then figure out what we can make happen. And I realize that we are going to have to prioritize, but I think it was really interesting, Jeff, and I'd be curious, you talked about needs assessments for aquatic centers, but I'd be really curious if there are local and/or more recent needs assessments that expand beyond just an aquatics facility, because we recognize that our recreation pavilion is many things beyond aquatics facility. Both my kids are there this week, in various camps, none of which involve swimming. So it's a crucial and important part of our community. But I think understanding, what needs assessments look like in other communities or have looked like, that expand beyond just aquatics would be helpful. And I think particularly you were talking about those shared use facilities. I think we know that there's a lot of needs and wants in our community that are beyond maybe a traditional rec center. And it would be interesting to see how communities have incorporated considering those into their analyses and decisions in other communities, because I don't know what that would look like, but I would love to understand better what that looks like. There's opportunity to find alignment and save money and get more for our community. I would be a fan of that, but I think generally from my perspective, I'm not at a place where anything feels like it is off the table for me. I think the rec pavilion is a critically important part of our community. I don't think there's too many people that would argue differently. I think when I first moved to Mountlake Terrace, people, and this is, 15 years ago, but, people who knew where Mountlake Terrace was, it was either because they had been to the rec pavilion or they had been to Double D Meats, right? Those are critically important parts of our community and the fabric of our community and what people think about when they think about Mountlake Terrace. And they're critically, they continue to be so. I do have a question, I think and it doesn't have to be a question we answered now, but I think we've talked about limiting factors in recreation programming, and space is a limiting factor for some of our recreation programming, particularly I think in childcare. I think that's been a place where we've kind of maximized space, and there's more need in the community than we're able to support. But I know we've also talked about staffing limitations and some of our challenges there. So I would love to see us have more capacity, particularly around youth programming. We've talked a lot about how do we keep our young folks, particularly those who are teens, how do we give them opportunity to do positive things and make positive connections within our community. We've talked about seniors and space for our seniors, and how do we ensure that we have space for programming beyond what's offered at the senior center. And I will say adults, we haven't talked about that so much, but I will say I would love more programming for myself at the Recreation Pavilion. And I think looking at statistics around kind of connection and how people feel and the number of folks that have a close friend or numerous close friends or feel connected to their community, and how important that is. I think when we talk about growth and change and the things that people are worried about losing when they think about what they love about our community, I would love to find space for all of that. And I would love to understand, if we build that space, how we're going to make sure that it gets used and isn't sitting there empty or unused because we can't figure out how to staff it appropriately. So I will say kudos for doing all sorts of job training, though. I was going to say I learned about our counselor and training program, and I will talk about how amazing that is another day. But, I do think we are looking for creative and innovative ways to both help our young folks find positive things to do, as well as to find our future hires in recreation. So I think that's amazing. Where was I going? I don't know. I think that, really, yes, on the needs assessment, yes, critically important that we have, community involvement in that process. And I would really like to bring back the conversation about funding as quickly as possible. I guess timeline to decision, Jeff, maybe that's one of my questions. So if sounds like there's general consensus thus far to move forward with kind of revisiting our plan, making sure that it still, is fully reflective of where we want to go. There's lots of options around funding. And again, at least from my perspective, I would not rule any of those out at this point. But I do think it's important. Access from a location perspective is important. And so I think when we think about partnership, location here in our community is something that I know is important. And so that would definitely be, I guess, a critical component of any partnership conversations from my perspective. But I guess, so given all of that, like how long realistically, so you said 5 years from decision to probably ribbon cutting, but how long from now until decision?
That is a very tough question to answer. Just to go back real quick to the needs assessment, that is it's not only just aquatic center that they did North King County, it was a recreation and aquatic center. So they have options for 35,000, 58,000, up to 90,000 square foot facilities those are large facilities. But how long would it take? Yeah, I mean, I think that, to be honest, and I won't speak out of turn, the city manager sitting to my right, but I think that these type of endeavors take a consultant, and for something like that to be undertaken by myself is probably going to be a little much. And I would recommend that we would have a consultant assist us with that needs assessment, and having a steering committee or a task force, I think, would be essential as well. That could really help guide that process. But timeline-wise?
I'll put Jeff on the spot.
So I completely agree that a professional consultant that focuses on this type of work is necessary to do an appropriate job for this community. I also think facilitation of a citizens task force, explaining the options, explaining and narrowing those down, I think, to a preferred alternative. I would say at least a year. So, and that's at minimum. More likely something in the 14 to 18 month range before we get to a decision. And well, I should say before we bring that to council, who then would, the recommendation and the needs assessment, bring that to council, who would then further refine what that decision looks like until we get to something that the council could support, and then what are the funding options in order to do it. And that's up to, in most instances that Jeff shared with us, many of those would need to go to the voters. And then that's dependent on election cycles, which then, who knows?
So if I were to just kind of, I guess, rough math that, given kind of that feedback, if we were to appropriate funds as part of our budget planning for 25-26, started that process and conversation, kind of as we, at least initial planning, and then obviously identifying a consultant once the budget is available, we could, in theory, have a decision or a proposal back to the council for decision by the end of 2025, which would put it potentially on the ballot in early 2026, which is usually when those ballot measures go to the public, right? Would be,
I think that is, I think we would need, I think it's possible, it's not likely. I think 27 is more likely.
That's a long time. So Jeff, follow-up question for you. So, because one of the options is not to renovate, and so let's say we'll go with the conservative estimate, because Jeff's estimates are probably much more realistic than mine. So if we didn't make a decision until 2027 and we moved forward, and then we have a 5-year cycle from there, that puts us at 2032. So that is 8 years out at this point. What are we looking at in terms of excess costs over the course of the next 8 years just to keep the pool functional? And what is the chance that there is something so significant that it is out of commission for a prolonged period of time or altogether?
Wow. There are elements to that building where one item could knock you out, right? We could be closed for a prolonged period and need to come to the council looking for $1 million, $2 million just to be operational again. So there's no question that's the potential. Part of the net present value diagram that I showed you was said, I think 2.5 million for the first 5 years of critical needs, and then that balloons over the course of those to more like 6 million, 4 to 5 million, I think is what it was. So, I mean, it is a possibility. I mean, we've done a pretty good job of keeping things together. I would estimate that as times move on and some of these elements continue to age, that it's going to be more and more difficult. And I'm already seeing that in my years there, that I feel like it's being more and more difficult to hold together. And when I was giving my 5-year estimate, I'm including the whole needs assessment analysis. So, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that it was like if council decided to start the process, that would be 5 years from that point.
So 5 years, so if we say go tonight,
Oh,
you're
boy.
5 years from now,
hold
we'll
me
have
to
a new
that now.
pool? I'm just trying.
Yeah, I mean, design, needs assessment takes, a significant amount of time, right? A year and a half at least. And then the actual design process is equal to that, I would say. And the construction is probably 1 to 2 years. So that equals 5 to 6 years, I would assume.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I know that there are no guarantees and, there are, we have lots of concurrent things moving forward. I will say, at least from my perspective, this is one of our higher priorities. I think for numerous reasons, both importance to the community as well as the potential for really negative impact to our budget and to our community if we don't move quickly. So I recognize between now and the end of the year, we have a lot to do in terms of budget and comprehensive plan. But I think at least from my perspective in 2025, I can't think of too many things that should be a higher priority than moving this forward and trying to come up with a timeline that is as short as we can make it, while ensuring that we do our due diligence to have the community engagement necessary and find a path forward that works best to get us where we need to go. So I feel like there's one more thing, but I know I've talked a long time. You talked about taxing districts. And again, this is, if you don't have an answer for this, that's fine. I'd be curious as we explore taxing districts, having, paid a little bit of attention to that North King County process. I'd be curious if there are taxing districts that extend across county lines or if there are restrictions that would limit partnership across county lines.
I think that there is no restriction on county lines for metropolitan park districts, because I think there are examples that we looked into that do cross that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few that do that. So there's no restriction on that, I believe. The public facilities district is one that you cannot do that because it has to be just that municipal corporation within that boundary of the approval where it was created. But other than that, I mean, I don't think there are restrictions. I mean, there are lines that we call counties, right? But I think that there are plenty of examples of people working together across county lines.
Okay. I was going to say that for me, I think would also be of interest, given that we know that there's needs there and that they haven't come up with a solution at this point that moves that forward for their community. And then I think the only other thing I would mention is just trying to think about, as we think about kind of needs assessment, thinking about impact as well. I think you touched a little bit upon that in your presentation, Jeff, but I think about, if we were at 400,000 before the pandemic in terms of users annually, did the math, I was like, oh, that's over 1,000 users, an average of over 1,000 users a day. That's a lot of folks. I think about, for me, my 2 users this week, that's 3 trips to the Pavilion for me, back and forth to the Pavilion. So I think it's tucked away in close to home for me, which is incredibly convenient, but it's not a super accessible place in terms of either, people getting in and out, and it's right next to a school, right? And that school is the largest elementary school in our district. It has a magnet program that brings in students from all over the entire Edmonds School District, which is one of the largest districts in the state, and traffic in and out of there. I mean, I'm sure your staff deal with that. I watch our poor waste management trucks try to navigate that on garbage day. And it's hard. That backs up for blocks. People can't get out of their driveways. It's not, the traffic component of access is challenging there. So I think that is an important thing for us to think about as we think about location moving forward, and how to either mitigate impact or reduce, kind of car trips in and out, and or think about location altogether. Oh, and I would just say, I think it is critically important that we keep the pavilion open. So I don't think rebuilding in the same spot is, I think that should be our absolute last option. I think in terms of not just the economic impact and keeping customers, but like the real impact on people's lives. I mean, lots of people depend on, the pavilion for childcare so that they can go to work. They depend on it for, health and wellness and keeping themselves healthy. Particularly folks with limited abilities to, limited mobility who may not have the ability to go to Linwood or some other location. So I think anything we can do to prioritize keeping that open while we build our new solution, I think would be key. So, and with that, I will just thank you for all of the work, both that you've already done and that we are asking you to do. And thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
I'm not going to give any more comments and opinion. I just wanted to thank everybody for listening to us for over an hour because it's a passionate topic. But I just wanted to give a process update. We also are going to talk about the comp plan, which I hope you all can stay for because that's a very important topic. And then we have one more after that, but I'd really like to hear your comments. You've heard some of ours, but I think we should take into consideration your comments as well before we give final direction. But I think Jeff's got a lot of information, but those comments are extremely important to us.
All right. So is there anyone else before we move on to Councilmember Woodard?
Related is, I know that we've done this in the past. Can we amend the, I know we've published what the schedule is, but at this point, I think people would be in the room. So can we bump up the public comment versus sit through the comprehensive plan? As much as I would love everybody to stay as well, I do want to recognize that's maybe a bit much to ask. I've already looked at the next presentation, and it's got presentations inside of presentations. So no love lost to you, Jonathan, out there, if you don't mind sitting a little bit longer at home. These folks are not at home, so. That'd be my recommendation if the council's open to it.
Can they make do you want to make that change?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Move the public comment up to presentation number 5 or section number 5. Item 7 to number 5, and then sequence.
Second.
Thank you.
So all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So we're going to move that. Thank you so much. And so next is public comments. And then do we have any public people signed up? And they need to come up here?
I'm making sure that microphone is on.
Double check it.
First is Stephen Barnes. It's on. And you'll have 5 minutes.
It's up here.
Up at the podium, please. Thank you.
I'm Stephen Barnes. Live down in the southeast corner of Mountlake Terrace, have for almost 40 years. In about 2011, slide 16 talks about 2011 in Linwood. About 2011, the city was really interested in getting a city hall. And they proposed a $46 million hall, or maybe it was 42. And then they went down to 36, like we're talking voting cycles. Then they went down to 24. And finally, they got really serious and they put together a citizens group, of which I was a part, and we agreed on 11 million. Slide 16 of the presentation that we had here shows Linwood in 2011 spending 25 million for a remodel, an addition. Let's say it's 2 million per 1,000 square feet, okay? So that is the very least cost solution that you have available, not a $370 million choice, but a choice of maybe $180 million that the public can accept. You talked about a lot of things that I'd like to comment on. I realize I just have the 5 minutes. But that slide 16, Council, you should go back and have a look at, because I think probably a remodel where we would build, just as an example, pools that can be used immediately because the classrooms can still be used. They could be used immediately while we figure out how to re-engineer the inside so that it can fit modern standards. Anyway, that's just a thought on that. You're not really at the funding level yet, I don't think. And I think 370 will be rejected, just the way the $46 million City Hall was rejected. Funding items here. If we're talking 370 million, I don't think the city of Mountlake Terrace is going to be willing, and you'll be putting out something that they will not accept. So I think you should look at the remodel idea. To me, that is that fits where we are as a city and how we have in the past done things. This city hall fits all of our needs, has even empty spaces that haven't been used, because it was built with a grand idea that was greater than our needs. And yet it was built for 11 million plus change. I know that there were a few other things that were added later. Anyway, so my point would be we should consider the remodel option as the first choice and then go from there. Thank you very much.
Next is Dale Jeremiah. You'll have 5 minutes at the podium.
Thank you, Dale Jeremiah, Mountlake Terrace. And over the years, I've conducted a brief survey of buildings like this, and I wanted to share it with you. Starting in 2016, the Mountlake Terrace voters approved a levy lid lift of 25 cents a thousand for our recreation and parks. Also in 2016, Sammamish opened a new $32 million, 69,000 square foot aquatic center, and as Mr. Betts mentioned, it's operated by the YMCA. In 2019, the Shoreline voters rejected Proposition 1, which included $68 million for a 75,000 square foot community aquatic center. And a sidebar to that is our total assessed value is $3 trillion and Shoreline is $15 trillion. Also in 2019, the YMCA of Snohomish County opened a $24 million, 58,000 square foot recreation aquatic center in Everett. So it's kind of interesting the numbers we hear. I mean, they did that for 24 million. In 2020, the Edmonds Senior Center Group opened a new Edmonds Waterfront Center with a 55-year ground lease from the city. And well, I think the city gets that building in 55 years that they built. 2024, the Seattle Storm basketball team opened a new $64 million, 50,000 square foot practice facility. And I think it just has a 1-lane lap pool. So what I'm suggesting as a press release for 2025 would be Mountlake Terrace grants the YMCA a 40-year ground lease of the softball field and tennis courts at 224th and 56th, allowing the YMCA to build a new regional recreation aquatic center serving not only Mountlake Terrace, but Edmonds, Briar, Shoreline, and Lake Forest Park. The YMCA of Snohomish County operates 6 regional facilities with pools in the county, and Mountlake Terrace would be the first location in the South County area. So if we say we're going to give them a 40-year lease on the land, all the other problems go away. We don't have to design and build. We don't have to float a bond levy that's going to take a 60% yes vote. And our current tax rate for us is 75 cents a thousand. And so this is sort of what you know, Mr. Barnes has mentioned, it would double our tax rate. So anyway, I would hope you consider that, and everyone here drive by the corner at 224th and 56th and just say, hey, I could see a new building there tonight or in the very near future. Thank you.
Next is Mary McMurray. I hope that's close. You have 5 minutes. Thanks.
My name is Nancy McMurray, and I'm one of the aquatics instructors at the Mountlake Terrace Pool. So I don't know much about the financing. However, I did a rough survey in my class on Wednesday. I said, where are you folks from? We were kind of evenly split between Mountlake Terrace, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore. There were smatterings of Bothell, Shoreline, Seattle, the Maple Leaf area, the Northgate area, and really further afield. So I know that Mountlake Terrace wants to keep control of this pool, but there are a lot of local cities and areas around that don't have a pool and are not going to be able to afford one themselves. And it seems such a shame not to work together, do some sort of deal. About the YMCA, the reports I've heard, mind you, this is one of those they say, but I've heard people complain about the costs of attending the YMCA pools, and there are two things that really, three things that are really appealing about the rec center. First of all, it is a very welcoming, friendly place. And people come there because they know they will find community. 2, the pool is warm. And that is very appealing to people who have hair like mine and people with small kids who want their kids to learn how to swim and know that they will learn more quickly if the pool isn't freezing. And I forget what my third one was. And the cost. The cost is reasonable. And even so, there are people that have a little trouble affording it. So as whatever comes up, it would be nice if maybe as all different communities, we could at least have some sort of fund that helps support people who can't afford it. But I am so happy to hear that you folks are as interested in the pool as we are who use it. Thank you.
Next is Patricia Schott. You'll have 5 minutes at the podium.
I've lived in Mountlake Terrace, I think, 14 years now, and the last 4 years I've been going to the Pavilion 3 times a week for water aerobics. And I swam there a lot before that, but 4 years ago I fell at work, and if it hadn't been for the Pavilion, I wouldn't be walking now. It's been my physical therapy. It's basically helped me return to full strength and be able to continue working. And during COVID, I was doing physical therapy in Lake Ballinger because that was the only place I could do it. And then it was amazing how many people continued as soon as the pool opened up, everything they went through to be able to go. I mean, going to the pool in their swimsuits with robes on and leaving to go home and shower, but they were still going to go so they could do their water aerobics. And when I joined them, I saw why and the benefits of it. And I don't want to lose that. And I don't want to have it closed down because it's broken. So anything that you can do to expedite getting a pool, keeping this pool running and getting us another pool would be awesome. But the YMCA, even though it sounds like a great option, it's too expensive. I work as a nurse, but I can't afford it. Because when I go there and I say I'd like a membership, I end up paying for everybody else's memberships too. The cost is too high for me. I was a single mom. It didn't matter. I still made too much money so that my cost was like way up here. And other people got to pay only a little bit or nothing. So I can't afford the Y, but I can afford Mountlake Terrace. And I'd like it to keep it that way. I'd like it, whatever option you end up doing, if you do partnership with the Y, can the Mountlake Terrace residents have a discount to make it still affordable? Because the fact that an affordable rec center makes it possible for us to have full health. And they do good work there, and they're wonderful. We set up an email, so if we don't show up for a couple classes, Tessa's gonna email us and say, are you okay? You got COVID? Are you okay? That kind of community is another thing that you talked about, connection and being part of a community for mental and physical health. Yeah, you need that kind of connection to stay healthy. And that's a community that we found at the rec center. So it's so essential in so many ways. And we really do need it to continue. And I'll do whatever I can to help. So I guess that's all I just wanted to speak up and support. It would be nice if it was bigger so that the lap swimmers wouldn't splash us so much. But I want them there too, and I want to be one of them working out really hard too once I get a little stronger. Thank you.
Last speaker is William Page. You have 5 minutes at the podium.
Hi, I'm William Page. And what I just wanted to throw out there is something I thought about the other day when my wife and I was talking about this, and that 270,000 visits that you talked about. And the first thing that came to my mind is it's great that you're tracking the visits, but are you tracking the percentage of what those visits really look like? So for instance, how many of those visits are multiple users? Like Councilmember Murray said, you know, her kids are there 3 times this week, times whatever. What percentage of that is that 270,000? And as the woman earlier talked about, Wednesday, she took a survey of, you know, and the people that were in the class were from all these multiple places. So are you tracking, you know, what percentage of that 270,000 visits are actually not even Mountlake Terrace residents? And the reason why I think that is important, because if you're going to ask Mountlake Terrace residents to pay for it, you know, from a bond or whatever, then it's important to know how many aren't even using it. That's not even part of the pavilion. You know, otherwise you're going to probably run into, like you had with the City Hall, a brick wall until you find a way to get those people convinced that they should pay for something that maybe they're not using. City Hall, this building here, services the city of Mountlake Terrace, but so we should be paying for it. But if the pavilion, percentage-wise, I don't know what that number is, maybe it's a huge number, percentage of folks, you know, but if 40% are the same people, then you may have difficulty getting the rest of the population to agree to pay for something that they don't plan on ever using. So that's all I've got.
No one registered to comment online, and written comments received were distributed to council members. That concludes public comment.
So do we move on to the next? Okay.
I think we have consensus direction from council on which direction we're going to go, and we will look into that, and we'll develop some ideas for you to consider shortly. It sounds like this is something that we want to bring back to council fairly quickly, and we'll be able to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here and for those who talked. And our next item on the agenda, and it's already 8:30, and we have 2 more long ones here. So the next item on our agenda is the did someone have their hand up? Okay. Okay. Is the presentation of the comprehensive plan update with our senior planner, Jonathan Morales.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Matsumoto Wright, Mayor Pro Tem Wall, members of the council, Jonathan Morales, Senior Planner, and I'm joined today with Christy Osborne with you in the room today, and Mandy Roberts from our OTAC consulting team. I'm going to share my screen. And thank you for the opportunity to present remotely today. Let's see. So today is our final briefing with City Council on the Comprehensive Plan Update Process, Vision 2044. This is our final briefing before we begin our draft plan review process with Council. So in terms of the agenda, wanted to start with just an overview of our project status and schedule, and then go into an update on our draft EIS, update on our draft comp plan review process, and then wanted to step back and sort of summarize the whole periodic update process that we've been through over the last year. And then keeping in tune with our council briefing series, just following up with the remaining elements that we wanted to wrap up this series with, which is the transportation element, capital facilities, and utilities. So in terms of project status, so we are towards the end of August. We're wrapping up, as I said, conversation on the elements, draft goals, and policies. So today we'll focus on transportation, capital facilities, and utilities. We also are in the process of going through our draft plan review process. So that is with Planning Commission right now, and we're working towards a recommendation to City Council on September 9th. So on that date, there will be a public hearing. We also have our draft EIS published and working towards a final EIS, which will be hopefully adopted at Council on October 16th, along with the comprehensive plan. So the draft EIS was published on August 1st. And so we are still within the public comment period. So it's a 30-day public comment period from August 1st to August 30th. The draft EIS was distributed to agencies and tribes. And then we held a public meeting on August 12th, which had about 30 participants. And so for those who were not able to attend, we do have those poster boards on our website, cityofmlt.com, Vision 2044. And so in terms of the preferred alternative, so some jurisdictions handle this in various different ways. Sometimes you have a draft EIS, which has selected a preferred alternative. We decided not to go that route, just so that we have an opportunity to hear feedback from Planning Commission and also members of the public in terms of what the preferred alternative should be. The selection of a preferred alternative would inform the comprehensive plan land use map. And then currently we are working with the Planning Commission to forward a draft land use map that is based on alternative 2, which, as discussed with Planning Commission and based on some of the water and sewer analysis that's been done with the draft EIS, we feel that it's fair to assume that this is a feasible path forward for the city. And to sort of wrap up, to recap the growth alternative numbers, as you recall this chart, we have a target for 2044 of 16,816 for housing units, 34,710 persons in terms of population, and then 11,148 jobs. So this is the target that's provided to us by the Office of Financial Management and also Snohomish County-wide planning policies. So we have 3 alternatives. If we go with a no alternative, that wouldn't allow us to meet our housing or population target, but it will allow us to meet jobs. But then if we did select this as a preferred alternative, there are some legal and financial repercussions for the city in terms of being eligible for grant funding. So that leaves us with either alternative 2 or alternative 3. And so if we were to go with the alternative 3 route, that has us at a population growth of 54,837. So we are comfortable in saying that alternative 2 will be where we want to land in terms of a preferred alternative. And we're still discussing this with Planning Commission, but this aligns with what we've heard so far from Planning Commission as well. So alternative 2, as you recall, allows the city to meet our required 2044 growth targets. It increases the total capacity for low income and moderate income housing, allowing us to meet the state mandates to adequately provide for zone capacity to meet housing need by income level. And this also includes middle housing for House Bill 1110. So as you recall, we have a few state mandates that we need to incorporate as part of this comprehensive plan update. So that's HB 1110 for middle housing, HB 1337 for ADUs, and HB 1220 for adequately providing housing by need and by income level. So let's see. So we're working with Planning Commission to move forward with this alternative and to get a draft land use map that includes updated allowed uses corresponding to this alternative. What this means for density and zoning is to be determined as we work towards updating our developing code following the comprehensive plan update process. So sorry, was there a comment?
No.
Oh. So we have until June 2025 to adopt middle housing regulations and ADU regulations. In terms of the land capacity results, as you recall, with the existing zoning, that has us at a housing deficit of 1,815 units. And a majority of that deficit is in the moderate density / middle housing bucket, which equates to about 924 units that we are not meeting a demonstrated capacity for. So we do have a interim draft comprehensive plan review. I'm sorry, comprehensive plan. This date here is August 7th. That was the version that we submitted to the Department of Commerce for a 60-day review. We do have an updated version dated August 16th, which I believe should have been in your council packets tonight. That was also a version that the Planning Commission received. And we're working towards an updated version next week that the OTAC team is working on, which will have it in a more design-oriented style and InDesign, and it'll be the version that Planning Commission reviews for the public hearing. So to summarize the comp plan review update process, we kicked that off with the Planning Commission in July. That was discussing the outline of the overall plan and then the introduction chapter. July 22nd, we went over preliminary draft EIS findings and housing needs. August 12th, we began the discussion on the elements section. So we focused on the environment element, recreation parks and open space, housing and economic vitality. On Monday, we'll go over the land use, transportation, capital facilities, utilities, elements. And then we'll also begin that conversation on the land use map and preferred alternative. And then the goal is that September 9th, we'll have a public hearing and a recommended draft will be forwarded to council to begin your review process on September 12th. And we've set aside about 3 dates. So a public hearing will be held tentatively on October 16th. Did also want to call out some of the process for draft plan review. So we did submit the plan to Commerce on August 7th. We received comments from the Department of Natural Resources, and we are gearing up to submit to the Puget Sound Regional Council next week for their 30-day review. We also distributed draft goals and policies to WDFW, and that was we received comments on July 29th, sorry. If there's any questions, please stop me.
Do we have any questions yet? Okay. Oh, you do? Okay, Councilmember Ryan?
Please let us know the WDFW term, please.
Yes, thank you. It's, I forget the first acronym.
Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jonathan, so with middle housing legislation, it basically says that every single family lot is allowed 2 whatever units or more, right? But when we take into account accommodating the growth, the projected growth that we've been assigned, what percentage of the single family lots do we expect or are we planning for to actually be 2 or more lots, 2 or more units? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
It does. Mandy, I don't know if we have that information from the Leland consulting team, from the land capacity analysis, maybe.
Who are you asking?
Mandy.
He's asking
Mandy.
Mandy from OTAC. We do have that information. I don't recall offhand, but we do have numbers for how many we think are going to be duplexes that are going to be developed over the 20-year time period, and how many single-family or residential parcels will add accessory dwelling units. We can get that information to you. If we go back in a slide, essentially that alternative 1 is looking at those numbers where if we just included every existing single-family residence, basically, and we project duplexes and accessory dwelling units, then we get to that 15,000 mark, which is going to be shy of what we're going to need. It also doesn't address the requirements of the other legislation, which is the middle housing, which is where we're really short on providing that middle housing in our community. And so while the population numbers might look a little bit better, they're still not there of those targets that we need, and they don't address the other things that we need to address for middle housing. So that's where that alternative 2 right now is in that ballpark of where we need to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be very interested in just the methodology and the what percentage is ADUs versus duplexes or other, and then where we're expecting to put the additional in alternative 2. Obviously town center is going to grow, we hope, and other areas. I think we're going to plan on a couple of different nodes of a little higher density around certain intersections, right? So I'd just be interested in the numbers, the math behind the math, and the land capacity, et cetera. Thank you.
Right.
Councilmember Murray?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. Since we're talking about capacity, I do have a quick, I guess, well, maybe not a quick, but I have a question. I think one of the questions I'd asked about earlier on was similar in some ways in terms of like how many units we were currently zoned for versus how many had been built, to understand kind of the difference between, what we had zoned for versus what we'd actually seen come to fruition. And then I guess I'm curious, I would love to apply that same methodology to the alternatives that we're looking at to better understand, these are what we're zoning for, and like recognizing that those units aren't going to be there tomorrow, and many of them won't be there 20 years from now either. And so I think if that is something that we don't have yet, it would be helpful as we think about kind of the path forward. Sorry, my voice is going today, guys. And then I guess my other just question, and maybe it's something we're delving into later, maybe it's a good question for tonight, not sure. But you talked about alternative two being, preferred because of the water sewer, the ability to mitigate water, sewer, and traffic impact. And so would love to understand with alternative three, what impact we couldn't mitigate if we were to move forward with that.
Okay, and that's in the draft environmental impact statement. So that kind of outlines with the higher densities where we're falling short and the reason why we do that environmental analysis, right? So it's in that draft, which is showing even if we do some improvements over that 20-year time period, we're not going to have the sewer capacity for sewer treatment. We're not going to have enough water, and we're not going to be able to mitigate traffic impacts on all of those. So we can get you that information. Just send you that, or it's online at that draft EIS as well. And those numbers, which kind of outline each of the three alternatives and where we're at with that as well. And then with all the comments we receive on that, like Jonathan said, after August 30th, then we'll start putting together that final EIS, which is what you folks will use to inform your final decision, and kind of where we're landing on some of these things as we move forward.
Thank you, Christy. And just, I guess, a question, since I'm going through this for the first time with the draft EIS, with the alternatives, is that based on the actual planned for units or the units that will come into fruition when we're talking about actual impact to water, sewer, and traffic?
That's based on the planned for units over that 20-year period.
Okay. Is there a way to better understand what we think the actual impact would be versus the planned for impact? I recognize we have to plan for it either way, but I guess I'm just curious.
Sure. There can be some guessing, and then we can take a look at previous planning efforts for what our last comp plan said and what the numbers that we actually landed on as far as where did we get. I'd be careful because it's a little apples and oranges, right? We've got to take into consideration we have a light rail station. And economics can shift where we think we're going as well. So, last comp plan, the comp plan before, we had the Great Recession. This comp plan, we had some economic upheaval, we had COVID. So, you can guesstimate, and we have those numbers of where we landed for that last one. But I think it's important in what we talked about last time, we're planning for a 20-year horizon. And just like we plan for anything, we want to plan at the higher level just to make sure that we're prepared. Are we going to reach those numbers? We're probably never going to reach those numbers in that 20-year period, right? But we're doing our due diligence and we're planning for those things to happen. And you folks are going to, or other folks sitting in your chairs, are going to be looking at this in 10 years from now again, right? So even though we plan for a 20-year period, major updates going to happen every 10 years. And the reason is we're making assumptions and guesses on what the future looks like. And we're giving it our best guess based on past and then also what the new legislation is and what, and those different things as well. So it's not an exact science. It's kind of, hey, what do we think? And even the map, that map will be adjusted a little bit when you guys finally receive the final recommendation from Planning Commission. We were working on it today. I can tell you the map that we were working on today doesn't look like that map. And Planning Commission will do some tweaking. And that's what this process is about, is refining and trying to get it in the best shape we can with the most support from the majority of planning commissioners and the majority of council members to get where we think that sweet spot is.
No, and thank you. I appreciate both the explanation and helping to, continue to grow my understanding as well as all of the work that has gone into it. I think as I kind of think about where we are versus maybe where we hoped to be, as we did our last plan, there's a gap, right? And so I guess it worries me a little bit that by, kind of shooting for an alternative that maybe seems like where we want to be, we actually are setting ourselves up to, not get to where we want to go. And so I guess I'm just trying to better understand.
Yeah, and I think it's how you look at it. It's a growth target that's mandated by the state.
Right.
I don't know if this is where we want to be. It's more of, this is what we need to plan for. And so I think there's a difference. And I think when we're talking about where we maybe want growth to occur, which is town center and some of these other areas, that's where I think we do the extra work to make sure that we're growing those areas that we want to focus on, right? So the comp plan's kind of doing the overarching planning with those targets. And then we do that extra work in those areas that we do want to see grow for economic development or some of those other things, some of those mixed use centers or those neighborhood centers or those type of things that we want in our community. The grocery store, how do we plan to get the grocery store? How do we plan to get?
We need more head count, Christy.
Yeah.
That's what everybody keeps telling me. So I'm trying to make sure we have enough head count that's actually going to get built so that we get our grocery store. And that there's enough jobs. I will say, I know I mentioned that earlier in the process. I will still say that given our projected growth targets for people living here, that still feels like we are not giving enough folks the opportunity to live and work in the same community. And so that would just be my initial thoughts. That is kind of some of my, as I look at this initially. But I appreciate the explanation and all of the work, and I'm excited to continue forward in the process.
No one else has their hand.
And I will say we can definitely get more in detail. Sorry. Yeah, we can get more detail as we start the draft plan review process on September 12th. So moving on, just wanted to
We have
summarize the
one hand that
periodic
just went
update
up.
process.
Jonathan?
So
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jonathan.
okay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So in September 2023, we formed the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Group. This group met monthly until June 26th. So that was a series of 11 meetings. And the role of this group was to inform on goals and policies, the vision statement, sub areas, growth alternatives, and act as a sounding board and represent community values. And so we had a planning commission liaison, as well as a sub-liaison for planning commission. So we had two. And then we had our council liaison, Councilman Woodard. With planning commission, we began this process in June 2023, going over the public participation plan, and then met again in August 2023, just reviewing the CPAG process. And then first briefing with planning commission was on December 2023. Beginning in January 2024, we began the briefing series where we went through each element, draft goals and policies, and that was over the course of 10 meetings with Planning Commission. With Council, we started this process back in March 2023, and that was with the review of a proposed scope of work and timeline for the draft comp plan work, aligning with our grant funding from Commerce for a periodic update grant. And we also made Council aware of the RFP process that was distributed to get a consultant on board. So as you know, we ultimately went with OTAC. And then we began the Council briefing series on February 2024, and we set aside 4 meetings for that. They were every 2 months. In terms of boards and commissions, we met with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission over the course of 4 meetings, and we really wanted to get their input on draft goals and policies, as well as our engagement process. And with RPAC, we met in May 2024 to introduce and discuss the RPO's goals and policies. So I just wanted to sort of put this slide together and really emphasize the amount of work that has gone into this over the last year. This represents a total of about 38 meetings, not including 8 meetings for the draft plan review process. So want to commend my team for really doing the good work, and for the OTAC team for helping us along. So in terms of community engagement, so we started with a community visioning survey, which had about 268 responses. We had a SEPA scoping open house in November 2023, which had about 50 participants. In March 2024, we had a spring open house that was about 40 participants. In June, we had a sub-area workshop focusing on the Melody Hill and Cascade View sub-areas, which had about 25 participants. Our draft EIS public meeting, as I mentioned, was on August 12th, and that had about 30 participants. And wanted to remind that we also had an online open house on our website. And so as of last week, there were about 125 responses across 2 modules, which were aligned with the SEPA scoping open house and spring open house. And so just a note that the total responses does not equate to number of respondents. And then we did Tour de Terrace, tabling and outreach, as well as the National Night Out. There was an interest in really prioritizing targeted engagement as part of this process. So we've began to work with the VITA agency. And so in terms of target engagement, we did intercept surveys with local BIPOC and small businesses. So we engaged about 27 businesses, and 21 of those filled out the survey. We were hoping to do a workshop with Mountlake Terrace High School before they went on summer break, but had to pivot to this intercept survey format. So as of last week, we had about 9 responses from students. And then we also had informal conversations with a local group here in town that spreads across Mountlake Terrace, Linwood, and Edmonds, I believe. And they're called the Latinas in the North group. We also had a pop-up at the Concern for Neighbors Food Bank, and then general outreach support for the draft EIS open house. So before I move on, any questions?
There was Councilmember Woodard first.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Really just a comment. I should have did this earlier, but now it's just as good, I suspect. I'm sorry you're not here for this, which is just to say, I want to thank you specifically, Jonathan. I had the honor of serving as our liaison, so I've been with you through almost all of these meetings. So just to watch you in action and recognize how many personalities you were managing, and that's just sitting at this table. So when we kind of mix that, I was hoping somebody would laugh. But nonetheless, just really acknowledging what a monumental amount of work, and like I say, managing a lot of personalities throughout that process and doing it very professionally, always forward-thinking and positive. You sound just as positive today as you did from day one, and it's hard to believe that was almost a solid year ago that we started on this, but still some road to go. But it's exciting to know that you're still leaning in, doing a great job. So just wanted to make sure that we got that on the record.
Appreciate that. All right, if there's no other questions, wanted to summarize some feedback on the transportation, capital facilities, and utilities elements. So I believe in the June meeting, we presented proposed draft goals for transportation. These have since been updated. The goals generally are emphasizing safety, connectivity, climate resiliency, active transportation, and freight mobility. These were some of the key themes that we heard over the course of the CPAC group, public comments received, and in working with the Planning Commission. So you see this theme a lot across our elements in terms of climate resiliency, and that's speaking to the House Bill 1181, which is going to require jurisdictions to incorporate climate resiliency and climate action planning in the comprehensive plan. And so we are required to have a specific climate change element by, I believe, 2029, or maybe it's 2027. But as part of this update process, we really ensure that we were accommodating as much as possible to keep in tune with that requirement. And then feedback heard from CPAG and Planning Commission. So an interest in complete streets concept and safer routes to school, travel demand management. So for folks who don't know what complete streets are, I do have from WashDOT, complete streets are streets for everyone, a transportation system that accommodates all forms of transportation that is accessible, comfortable, economical, sustainable, and efficient in the travel space provided. We also heard continued support for electric vehicles and strategies such as public charging stations throughout the city, importance of connectivity between all neighborhood centers, amenities, transit, parks, and open space. Also interest in a bike ped advisory board, which will be instrumenting in helping support another effort that Planning Commission and CPAC were in support of, which is a bike ped action plan. Local and regional coordination on key transportation issues, and general concern about parking impacts. For utilities, we have 2 goals. And so just stressing the importance of third-party utility providers and providing those key services to residents and ensuring adequate information is shared and that infrastructure that is developed is compatible with existing land uses and a changing environment. And feedback heard on the utilities element was support for undergrounding of power, and then also being proactive and ensuring that we can start to build that network of underground conduit, so that way it'll facilitate more efficient undergrounding of power. Also stressing the importance of educational opportunities for our residents in terms of waste management and support for composting, support for publicly available Wi-Fi and internet, and support for renewable energy sources and addressing carbon impacts. Again, speaking to that climate resiliency. For capital facilities, the draft goals stress importance of leveraging partnerships, climate resiliency, adequate fiscal management, emergency management, and meeting needs that come with the population growth that we need to accommodate. So that 34,710 target by 2044. And feedback heard from our various sources, just stressing again, education was a key theme across the elements. So interest in education on water quality and affordability, and helping to inform the community about our rate study process and what that looks like, support for acquiring new parks and open space, support for addressing climate change and mitigating impacts, identifying underserved areas for access to public services, and leveraging partnerships for human services. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So someone here had questions? Councilmember Sonmore, was that you? Okay. All right. I don't see anyone with their hands up.
Thank you, Madam
Mayor Pro Tem here.
Yeah, I want to echo Councilmember Woodard's comments. I'm sure we all do. Jonathan and Christy, you guys have done a fantastic job in pulling this all together and keeping the process moving forward and getting community involvement and engagement. I am looking forward to, I thank you for the the draft language. I'm looking forward to getting into the goals and policies and action steps or actions to take. And I did get a little bit of feedback from some of the folks that we've been working with on the CPAG. So I encourage us to reach out to the chamber and on particularly the economic development element, vitality element, and Chris Collier on the housing element and some of the demographic studies and how we're addressing that. Anyway, so some good valuable feedback that we can incorporate into some of the actual language of the draft as we go through that process. So anyway, but I think it's a great job. I'm looking forward to getting into the details as we move forward, and I appreciate everything you guys have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see anyone else's hands going up, so thank you very much. Jonathan
thank you all.
and Chris. Okay. Do we need a break before we go to the next one? No? Okay.
I think this one will be pretty quick. We can take a break before we go to exec session.
Okay, great, thank you. So next is the presentation, the review and vote on Sound Transit Performance Guarantee with our Community and Economic Development Director, Christy Osborne.
All right, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. Christy Osborne, Community and Economic Development Director. We're before you this evening as we get close to revenue service for light rail, which will be next Friday, August 30th. And as part of that, you guys all know that we've been at light rail for, well, since I've been here and before I got here for the last several years. Back in 2019, we went through and had the public hearings for the land use entitlement of the light rail station. And we've been working on this project to make sure that we were getting the required improvements that were required as part of the conditional use permit and site plan approval and all the other things that come with a project such as this size. There were 13 different sites that we permitted, and we divided each of those sites into separate units with conditions for each of those sites and then overall project requirements. And we've been working to get issue a temporary certificate of occupancy for the light rail station to open this next Friday, and have done so with the focus on trying to get the station improvements completed for there. But in saying that, due to the size and complexity of this project, there's many other conditions of approval that have yet to be satisfied, particularly on those other 12 sites in particular. And so we worked to come up with a performance guarantee with Sound Transit to make sure that we have an agreement that says, yes, we've issued a temporary certificate of occupancy to open for revenue service. But we still have some more work to take care of. And so it's just an acknowledgement that that work's going to continue. So you'll see in that performance agreement, we have two exhibits. One is those conditions that have yet to be satisfied in order to get what we call a final certificate of occupancy. And then there's a second exhibit in there, Exhibit B, which are some of those items that we're still discussing and negotiating, which are kind of common with a project such as this size, where we're talking about things that are not necessarily black and white, but they're a little bit gray, and we work through them as part of a major construction project such as this. So what we're asking for this evening is that council authorizes the city manager to sign this document, and that Sound Transit will then sign this document as well, and that helps us move forward with just protecting the city's interest as we move forward with this project. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Sandmore?
Just real quick. So how do I say it? Is it a legal document that our city's made up, and how do we know Transit will sign it?
We've been working with them. Yes, it's a legal document. Our city attorney has been part of this review of this document and as well. And so Sound Transit is satisfied with the content of this document at this stage. So we've worked through all those questions at this point.
Anyone else? No, they need this to open, right?
Yes, yeah.
We won't look very good. You can skip the Mountlake Terrace station.
Next Friday might be a little embarrassing without it.
Don't say it.
All right,
Can I make a, or you're going to make the motion?
I would, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, okay.
who wants to make the motion?
Brian already had his hand up.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to authorize the city manager to sign the attached performance of guarantees between the city and Sound Transit.
Second.
Is it moved and seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we can have a celebration next Friday. Yes.
A night market.
So we're going to be going into executive session, and we're going to have a 5-minute break?
Yeah, Mayor, I would suggest a 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene an executive session in the room, the Lake Ballinger room, and I would like to note that there is no action to follow the executive session. Yes, and we'll be reviewing potential litigation. I expect we'll start with 30 minutes, and then if we need to extend, we can extend at that time.
And do we
So-
have to make a, if we go past 10 o'clock, do we have to bring it out here, or can we have that extension voted on in the back?
Let's not make it.
Yeah.
You can do
let's-
it.
Yeah, let's,
Do it now.
we'll run that, hit that bridge when we get to it.
Oh, we can do it
Yeah,
now?
so make an extension just in case, that way we don't have to worry about
So
it.
who wants to make it to at least 10?
No.
10:30, 10:15? Mayor Pro Tem Wall?
10:02?
Oh,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to authorize the council to go past the 10 o'clock deadline until 10:30, really?
Second.
Just to be safe.
so it's been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we hopefully will not need to go till 10:30, but we can.
So break starts 9:13, we'll be back at 9:18, and then we'll conclude at 9:48 unless we extend.
Executive session has been extended until 10:08.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we're back from executive session. No actions were taken. And next is the review of the September 5th meeting agenda. I didn't see one.
Yeah, actually, there was no link when I clicked on it. so.
Okay, so
yeah,
there's,
I'll review it. No idea what it says.
all right, and then so council comments. Does anyone have any council comments? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Go team, look at us.
Recording.